The first thing my husband said at our divorce hearing wasn't directed at the judge. It was directed at me. He leaned back in his chair, loosened the cuff of his expensive navy suit, and smiled as though we were attending a business meeting instead of ending 23 years of marriage. You really think that little letter of yours is going to change anything? A few people in the courtroom glanced toward us. His attorney smirked. The young woman sitting 2 seats behind him, the woman he had started dating before our marriage had even officially ended, let out a quiet laugh. You always were dramatic, Claire, she said, just loud enough for me to hear. I didn't answer. Instead, I placed both hands on the wooden table in front of me and slowly slid a single sealed envelope toward my attorney. She nodded once. Nothing more. Across the room, my husband shook his head with amused confidence. I almost feel sorry for you, he said. You've spent months pretending you're smarter than everyone else. His words should have hurt. Maybe 6 months earlier they would have. But grief has a strange way of changing people. At first it breaks you. Eventually, it teaches you which voices no longer deserve space inside your mind. The bailiff called for everyone to stand. The judge entered the courtroom carrying several files beneath one arm. He greeted both attorneys politely before taking his seat. For several minutes the hearing unfolded exactly as everyone expected. Financial disclosures, property division, retirement accounts, routine questions, routine answers. My husband looked completely relaxed. He answered every question with practiced confidence, occasionally exchanging quiet whispers with his attorney. Every now and then he glanced toward me, not with sadness, with pity, as though he had already won, as though the ending had already been written. Then my attorney quietly stood. Your Honor. She lifted the sealed envelope from the table. My client has asked that you read this before today's proceedings continue. The courtroom grew unexpectedly quiet. The judge adjusted his glasses. A personal letter? My attorney nodded. Yes, Your Honor. It contains information that will make today's testimony much easier to understand. Across the room my husband actually laughed. A letter. He looked toward the judge. With respect, Your Honor. I hope we're not turning family court into a book club. Several people smiled politely. Even the court reporter looked down to hide a reaction. The judge accepted the envelope without expression. He broke the seal, pulled out 3 neatly typed pages, and began reading. First, nothing changed. His expression remained completely neutral. He reached the bottom of the first page, turned to the second. His eyebrows lifted almost imperceptibly. My husband noticed. His smile faded just a little. The judge continued reading. Halfway through the final page, he stopped. Not because he was confused, because he looked back at the financial records lying beside him. Then he reread one paragraph. Very slowly. When he finally looked up, his eyes settled directly on my husband. Mr. Harrison. My husband's confident smile disappeared. Yes, Your Honor? The judge folded the letter carefully. I believe I have several questions before we move any further. For the first time that morning, my husband looked uncertain. And for the first time in nearly a year, I knew something he didn't. My name is Claire Harrison. I was 48 years old when my marriage officially ended. People often assume divorce begins the day someone files paperwork. It doesn't. Divorce begins much earlier. It begins with small silences, missed conversations, unanswered questions. A husband who suddenly smiles at his phone more than he smiles at his wife. It begins with ordinary moments that don't seem important until months later, when you realize they were quietly changing everything. Daniel and I met when I was 23. He wasn't wealthy. Neither was I. He worked as a regional sales representative for a medical equipment company. I taught 5th grade at a public elementary school outside Indianapolis. Our first apartment was barely large enough for a dining table. When it rained hard, water collected beneath the kitchen window. Every winter the heating system made strange knocking sounds that kept us awake. We joked that the apartment had more personality than comfort. Back then, that was enough. We spent Friday nights eating cheap takeout on the living room floor. Sunday mornings meant coffee, crossword puzzles, and arguing over which pancakes were mine because Daniel always stole the crispiest one. When our daughter Emma was born, life became louder, messy, better. 4 years later our son Noah arrived. The house we eventually bought wasn't impressive. But every wall carried memories. Birthday decorations. Family photographs. Pencil marks showing how much the children had grown each year. It wasn't perfect. It was home. Daniel used to tell everyone the same thing. I couldn't have built any of this without Claire. I believed him. For 23 years. I believed him. Then everything changed. Not overnight. Slowly. Quietly. Almost politely. It started after Daniel accepted a position as chief operating officer for one of the fastest-growing logistics companies in the Midwest. The promotion doubled his salary. It also introduced him to a world neither of us had ever lived in. Private clubs. Luxury conferences. Executive retreats. Charity galas. Designer suits. Suddenly people cared about appearances. About status. About who sat beside whom during dinner. Daniel adapted surprisingly fast. Almost too fast. His wardrobe changed first. Then his schedule. Then his priorities. Late meetings became normal. Weekend conferences appeared out of nowhere. His phone never left his hand. Sometimes he smiled while reading messages. Then immediately locked the screen whenever I entered the room. When I asked whether everything was all right, his answer never changed. Just work. Always work. I wanted to believe him. After all, successful careers demand sacrifice. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. Emma wasn't convinced. She was 21 by then and studying architecture. One evening she watched her father answer yet another message during dinner. After he left the table she quietly asked, "Mom, has Dad always smiled at his phone like that?" I forced a small laugh. "He's just busy." She didn't argue. But she didn't believe me either. Neither did Noah. Our 17-year-old son stopped asking whether his father would attend baseball games. Eventually, he simply assumed the answer would be no. The house remained beautiful. But somehow, it no longer felt warm. Every room echoed with things left unsaid. And although I didn't know it yet, the worst betrayal wasn't the affair. It was the lie I had been telling myself. That everything would eventually return to normal. It never did. And 3 months later, one ordinary Tuesday afternoon, I opened our mailbox and found an envelope that changed the rest of my life. The envelope looked ordinary. Plain white. No return address. No company logo. Just my name written across the front in neat black ink. For several seconds I simply stood beside the mailbox, grocery bags hanging from my wrist while the late afternoon sun settled across our quiet neighborhood. Something about it felt deliberate. Not threatening. Not friendly. Just thankful. I carried it inside and placed it on the kitchen counter without opening it. Old habit. Whenever something important arrived, Daniel and I usually looked at it together. Bills. College letters. Medical reports. 23 years had built routines that survived longer than trust. I started putting away groceries instead. Bread. Fresh strawberries Noah loved. Chicken breasts for dinner. The envelope remained where I had left it. Watching me. By the time I finally opened it, the house had grown unusually quiet. Inside were only 4 photographs. No letter. No explanation. No signature. I picked up the first photograph. Daniel. Standing outside an expensive downtown restaurant. He wasn't alone. A woman with dark blonde hair stood beside him. She wasn't simply talking to him. She was adjusting his tie. The gesture was intimate. Comfortable. Practiced. I swallowed. Maybe it was taken out of context. Maybe she was a colleague. I reached for the second photograph. They were seated inside the restaurant. Across from one another. Smiling. His hand rested on top of hers. Not accidentally. Not briefly. Naturally. The third photograph showed them leaving together. He was laughing. Daniel held the door open for her. The fourth photograph hurt the most. They were getting into the same car. His car. The one we had purchased together 6 months earlier. I lowered the pictures onto the kitchen table. The room suddenly felt smaller. The refrigerator hummed softly behind me. Outside, a lawn mower droned somewhere down the street. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary life. Yet everything inside me had shifted. My phone buzzed. Daniel. Running late. Bored dinner. Don't wait up. I stared at the message. Then at the photographs. For nearly a minute. Finally, I typed only 3 words. Have fun tonight. He responded almost immediately. Love you. I looked at those words for a long time. Love you. People often imagine betrayal begins with discovering an affair. It doesn't. Betrayal begins when someone lies without hesitation. I didn't confront him. Not that night. Not the next day. Or the day after that. I watched. I listened. I paid attention. Funny thing about the truth. Once you stop arguing with reality, it becomes surprisingly easy to see. Daniel suddenly cared about clothes he had never noticed before. New watches. Custom shirts. Cologne I hadn't bought. Haircuts every 2 weeks instead of every 2 months. He joined a private gym despite never enjoying exercise. Every change seemed insignificant. Together, they painted a completely different man. Emma noticed it too. One Saturday morning she helped me clean the kitchen. Dad seems. He searched for the right word. Different. I smiled without looking at her. People change. He studied my face. Is that what this is? I wanted to tell her everything. I lied. I think work is just stressful. She nodded politely. But before leaving the room she quietly said, Mom, don't keep protecting someone who isn't protecting you. After she walked away, I cried for the first time. Not because of Daniel. Because my daughter had become old enough to see what I had spent months refusing to accept. 3 weeks later another surprise arrived. Except this one wasn't anonymous. It came from our accountant. Daniel had asked me for several tax documents. Nothing unusual. I gathered them from the filing cabinet in our home office. While searching, I noticed a folder I had never seen before. Executive compensation. Curious, I opened it. Inside were copies of financial statements, annual bonuses, stock awards, deferred compensation. Then one number caught my attention. A payment. $240,000. Transferred 8 months earlier. I frowned. We had never discussed it. Daniel had always handled investments. Not because he wanted control. Because I trusted him. At least, I used to. I checked our joint savings account. Nothing. Investment account. Nothing. College fund. Nothing. Where had the money gone? I kept turning pages. Then I found another transfer. $90,000. Another. $48,000. Different accounts. Different companies. The amounts were too large to ignore. Yet somehow, they had disappeared without affecting our lifestyle. That night Daniel came home after 10. He looked tired. Or perhaps practiced at looking tired. I've got a question. He loosened his tie. Shoot. I was organizing tax paperwork. He froze. Only for half a second. Most people would never have noticed. After 23 years. I did. I found some executive compensation records. Oh. There are several large transfers I don't recognize. His smile returned too quickly. Deferred investments. Company recommendations. It's complicated. Complicated. Interesting word. People telling the truth usually explain. People hiding something often simplify. I nodded. I figured. He kissed my forehead. I'm going to shower. I watched him walk upstairs. Then I looked toward the office. For the first time, I wondered whether the affair and the missing money were connected. At that moment, I still believed I was investigating a marriage. I had no idea. I was about to uncover something much bigger. The question stayed with me all night. Not the affair. Not even the missing money. The connection between them. Daniel had always separated his personal life from his business life with almost obsessive precision. Now those lines seemed to be disappearing. The next morning after he left for work I returned to the home office. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the neat rows of binders inside the built-in shelves. For years I had admired how organized Daniel was. Now I wondered if organization had simply made his secrets harder to find. I opened the filing cabinet again. This time I wasn't looking for tax records. I was looking for patterns. Patterns tell stories. People lie. Numbers rarely do. The first thing I noticed was timing. Every unusually large transfer had happened within 48 hours of one particular kind of event. Executive retreats. Investor conferences. Out-of-state business meetings. The exact trips Daniel had insisted were mandatory. I wrote each date on a yellow legal pad. Then I compared them with the photographs that had arrived anonymously. My heart slowed. Not because I was calm. Because certainty has a strange effect on the body. Every photograph had been taken during one of those same business trips. The affair wasn't happening alongside his work. It was happening during it. 3 days later, I received another unexpected phone call. Mrs. Harrison? Yes. My name is Thomas Reed. His voice sounded cautious. I used to work with your husband. Used to. The words immediately caught my attention. I think we should meet. I hesitated. What is this about? A long silence followed. Finally he said quietly, I believe you're asking the wrong questions. We met the following afternoon at a small coffee shop 20 minutes outside downtown. Thomas looked to be in his late 50s. Gray hair. Simple clothes. The kind of face people overlook. After ordering coffee he leaned forward. I resigned 6 months ago. Why? He stirred his coffee slowly. I stopped recognizing the company. I waited. Daniel wasn't always like this. I know. Thomas nodded. Success changes some people. He reached into a worn leather folder. I can't legally give you confidential company documents. He paused. But I can tell you where to look. He slid a small notebook toward me. Inside were dates. Company names. Meeting locations. Nothing illegal. Nothing confidential. Just observations. I kept notes because things stopped making sense. I looked up. What things? Companies receiving payments that never performed work. Consultants nobody had ever met. Travel expenses that didn't match schedules. My stomach tightened. Did you report it? I tried. What happened? Thomas smiled sadly. I retired earlier than planned. For the next 2 weeks. My evenings followed the same routine. Dinner with Noah. Phone calls with Emma. Then hours sitting alone at the dining room table. Bank statements. Investment reports. Corporate filings. Public records. At first everything looked unrelated. Gradually, the pieces began fitting together. One consulting company shared an address with an empty office building. Another had been incorporated only months earlier. A third listed a registered agent who had died nearly 4 years earlier. The deeper I searched, the simpler everything became. Daniel hadn't created an elaborate system. He had created one he believed nobody would ever question. Because nobody ever questioned him. Least of all, me. One Friday evening my attorney Margaret Ellis came to my house. She reviewed every document in complete silence. Nearly an hour passed before she finally looked up. Claire. Yes. This isn't just about hiding marital assets anymore. I already knew. What do you think it is? She folded her hands. I think your husband became careless. She pointed toward one highlighted page. Look here. I leaned closer. This transfer. It was authorized after he claimed he no longer had access to that account. I frowned. So. She smiled faintly. He forgot the paperwork has dates. A single date. 3 days. That was all. 3 days separating truth from a lie. Sometimes the smallest mistake destroys the biggest deception. The weeks passed quickly. Court approached. Daniel became even more confident. His attorney filed aggressive motions. Settlement offers arrived almost daily. Each one demanded I walk away quietly. Each one became worse than the last. One evening he called unexpectedly. I don't understand why you're making this difficult. I remained calm. I could ask you the same question. He sighed dramatically. Claire. You're never going to prove anything. Interesting choice of words. Not. I've done nothing wrong. I said. You're never going to prove anything. There is a difference. A very important one. The night before the hearing. I couldn't sleep. Not because I was afraid. Because I kept thinking about our children. Emma. Noah. Someday they would ask what happened. I didn't want them to remember arguments. Or anger. Or revenge. I wanted them to remember dignity. So instead of writing pages filled with accusations, I wrote something else. A letter. Not to attack Daniel. Not to shame him. Not even to convince the judge. I wrote a timeline. Every promise. Every unexplained transfer. Every contradiction. Every date. Every fact. Nothing emotional. Nothing exaggerated. Just the truth. When I finished, it was only 3 pages long. I folded it carefully. placed it inside a plain white envelope, and slept peacefully for the first time in months. The next morning, Daniel arrived at court wearing the same confident smile I had seen for almost a year. He looked at me, then at the envelope resting beside my attorney. He laughed softly. "Still writing stories?" I smiled politely. "No. I'm finally finishing one." He chuckled. "You always did like happy endings." I didn't answer. Because I already knew something he didn't. Facts don't care who laughs first. The judge accepted the envelope. He read silently. The courtroom remained completely still. Page 1. Page 2. Page 3. Then he stopped. Looked toward Daniel. Looked back at the financial disclosures. Then quietly asked, "Mr. Harrison, can you explain why your sworn testimony conflicts with your own authorization records?" Daniel blinked. His attorney immediately leaned toward him. They whispered urgently. The judge waited. Finally Daniel cleared his throat. "There must be some misunderstanding." The judge nodded slowly. "I don't believe there is." Silence filled the room. Then another question. Another contradiction. Another document. Each answer created a new problem. The confidence Daniel had carried into court slowly disappeared. Not dramatically. Quietly. Exactly the way our marriage had disappeared. When the hearing ended, the judge ordered additional financial discovery and referred several documents for independent review. As people began leaving the courtroom, Daniel remained seated. For the first time in 23 years. He looked completely lost. Outside the courthouse, he caught up with me. "Claire." I stopped. "I'm sorry." The words sounded genuine. Perhaps they were. But apologies arrive differently when they are offered before consequences. "I never wanted this." I looked at him calmly. "You just kept choosing it." He lowered his head. "I made mistakes. You made decisions." Another silence. Finally he asked, "Do you think you'll ever forgive me?" I thought about our first apartment. Our children's birthdays. Sunday pancakes. Every ordinary memory that had once made us a family. Then I answered honestly. "One day. I probably will." He looked hopeful. "But forgiveness isn't the same as getting your life back." I walked toward my car without looking behind me. For years I believed strength meant saving a marriage at any cost. I was wrong. Sometimes strength means telling the truth. Even when it changes everything. Sometimes justice doesn't begin with a judge's decision. Sometimes it begins the moment you stop lying to yourself.